So I continue. This is part two of just a brief overview of my thoughts on um, the poems which are part of what I've called uh, uncollected works, or uncollected. So this is just looking at one called The Game, and I've written here July 2010. So I presume that's when I wrote it, and I think I was in Cambridge around then, living in Cambridge, and so yeah, that was an interesting time. I had been sort of recovering. I'd left my job at the NHS, and after hitting burnout and all the other kinds of things that had happened, and I was spending a lot of time painting, oil painting. I started oil painting while I was there, and it was really the only thing I could do. Just wasn't really able to do anything else, and was getting exhausted very quickly. But as I spent more time sort of resting and recovering, I was able to walk further, and often went up to Grantchester, walked up to Grantchester, to the tea rooms and to the orchard tea rooms, and would often just kind of wander and maybe write poetry or just relax. And I think that's where this poem arose. Grantchester, of course, made famous by I think Rupert Brooke and another poet, war poet, who would often frequent the orchard tea rooms and Grantchester, and of course Lord Byron, who used to swim up in what's now called Byron's Pool, and So the next poem there in that collection is called that I have just titled Untitled 4, I think it is. Whatever the next sequence number was on from my part 1 video. So this poem, I've made a note at the end of the poem which says, to be read right column, left column, or both. And I put a date on there, 23rd of September 2011. I'm not sure if that's the date that I wrote the poem, or whether that's when I made the note at the end of the poem, but I suspect it's when I wrote the poem. Not sure if I would have still been in Cambridge, living in Cambridge then, but it's the one that commences, how can I go from one day away, feeling fine from myself, to another, then stay, to sadistic, right here, cutting of my arms, asleep, but so far only in desire, to hurt myself in dreams, from love of love, in love, out of love. But I have never cut myself. I've never done that, and never really had any strong inclination or desire to do that. So I'm not really sure what I was thinking about here when I was writing, but sometimes my poetry I write I write something a sentence where I say I, but I then am also sort of referring to others or someone else or a kind of ethereal something. So it's not always, it's not, in fact, it's not often about me. It's about tapping into the cosmos and sort of being a conduit for the thoughts and feelings and emotions that are out there, and also connected to the place where I am when I'm writing, or the place that I'm focusing on when I'm writing. So if I read that then again, left column, how can I go from one day feeling fine to another, to sadistic, cutting of my arms, but so far to hurt myself from love in love. And so that reads differently. And in the right column, how can I go away from myself, then stay right here, sleep only in desire, in dreams of love, out of love. So yeah, 3 ways to sort of orate that poem, or read it by any of the 8 methods discursively considered in Cleary and Cleary's Blue Cliff record, which was the 100 or so koans, legal cases of the ancient Buddhists. Anyway, so that poem I wrote at the end in brackets, stock for now, because I wasn't writing a poetry collection at the time, or I hadn't intended that one to go into the poetry collection I was writing. And I will go back and just recap on any other items, any other poems that I had made a similar note at the end of in a moment. Next one is called Purple Dunwich. So this would have been, I think, no, actually, I'm not sure when this was written, but I did write a children's book, an existential novella, and it's not really a children's book, but it's kind of I said it's a book for adults, children and adults, so adults who still have their inner child, and maybe children who are sort of, as they say, born old, or have wisdom early in life, and maybe are of an existential kind of perspective, because I think that can be the case with some people when they're children, as early as when they're children. So that book was called Kirkle Dunwich, which is a fictional village, which I made up the name of, and so that's the connection here with Purple Dunwich. I'm not sure why I wrote Purple Dunwich here, but maybe it's a reference to Purple Haze by Jimi Hendrix. This poem really just speaks about the most interesting line to me, I think, looking back at it, is religion and trend. That which must remain unchanging, and that which by its nature is change. So thinking there about the word religion, not so much in the context of religious beliefs, but more along the lines of things that we do religiously, routine and other things which are sort of adhered to by our beliefs, and trend as in the way things do change over time. Can form a trend statistically, if you like, by 7 successive points of quantity in a same direction, or however you want to think of it. An exponential, perhaps. Gentle sloping trend. And I noted here at the end of this poem, continue to smiles, describe a smile occurring. And I'm not sure what I meant by that, other than I was writing a poetry collection called Smiles. And I think I wrote the word continue because I think I was planning to add this poem to the Smiles poetry collection, but then writing describe a smile occurring suggests to me that I intended to write further, and I'm going to say stanzas because that's, I believe, the correct terminology, as someone has kindly taught me. Additional stanzas to go on to discuss or to talk about, to poeticize the way that a smile occurs, or whether a smile is something which is trendable or religious in terms of what I mentioned earlier. So the next one, I think this one is also untitled, and I think it's untitled 4 if I've got the numbering correct. Begins, so I thought about the time we never met, and then about the time we could have met. And I've written at the end there, continue to smile, so I presume that I meant for that to be added to the Smiles poetry collection. And I can't really remember what that was about, but it looks like it was a question of who it was about. But sometimes the who is a fictional person in my poetry, and not necessarily about a person or a muse or anything like that. Next one is called Rude Awakening, and begins Saturday morning in Brighton in the pouring rain under shelter of the Café Delis. And it is in every way that I find nothing here. For the pains and torments of humankind, you are with me, holding my hand. You comfort me, and in shelter for this other unquiet me. And so on. And I wrote at the end of that stock, so that must be for, not particularly for any poetry collection I was writing. Clearly I was in Brighton then, and if it was Saturday morning, I either travelled down by train from Havant, or I was staying overnight in Brighton, which I think I stayed overnight in Brighton once or twice. When the sun has set is the next one. Gravity pulls our stories in. It keeps us in its flux. And I wrote after that. Stock hardly started because I clearly wrote a couple of lines and then didn't continue writing that. But looking back at it, I think I could consider that as a sort of what's the Japanese haiku kind of form. But yeah, let's continue. Winter Landscape on Caspar. This is about Caspar Friedrich's painting, which I painted my own version of, and landscape, yet portrait tall objects. Erases all that one should know of a painting. The angles are devastating, the treetops like podgy cacti fingertips. The composition is of such mastery. I'm not sure about my oration style now. I'm thinking I should change it. It's a bit kind of premeditated and sort of contrived. Anyway, it is good to have a style for orating your poetry. I think one's poetry. And it is unlike me, I have to say, to have written anything about the rain, as I did in that previous poem I mentioned there, Rude Awakening, Saturday morning in Brighton in the pouring rain. It's quite unlike me to mention the rain in that sort of direct way, because when I first started writing songs as a child, I was often sort of captivated by the slightly melancholic matching with my calm demeanour and character persona, I suppose, of the weather when it rained, and would often mention rain in my early writing of songs. And of poetry. And I'm just beginning to think that I used to write songs when I was as young as 8, 9, 10. Because I distinctly remember sitting on the windowsill of my childhood bedroom looking out of the window at the rain and writing lyrics. Perhaps I did, perhaps I didn't. A lot of my poetry would have been lost over the years because of emergency moves from one house to another for various scandalous reasons. Scandal being too scandalous, as in abominations that have been done to me. But I have managed to retain what I believe is most of poetry and songs. Well, most of the poetry that I've written, I've actually lost, I think, a lot of the songs. And lyrics and music that I've written. But I can imagine that I may have written that line in a direct way in the pouring rain, so that I was almost being I was almost sort of objecting to my usual what's the word? Affectation or masking of not mentioning rain in poems because of how cliched it is. So onwards, and this is the last poem in the Uncollected Works, Uncollected collection, which is called How to Be Uninteresting. Talk about the weather is the first line. Keep out of trouble. Talk one-to-one, not in groups. And so on. I won't read it all because I should probably rate them on video for my YouTube channel. And yeah, I don't really recall when I wrote this, but I would say that these were written I would say these were written between 2009, 2010, and probably around the time I wrote Smiles. So that would be sort of 2017, 2016, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, but they will not be in chronological order in the complete works called Place, because I don't know which order in which they were written, but I may try to reorder them from this video differently from this video, so that they are in what would appear to be the correct chronological order from what I can recall. Anyway, that's it for this video. Thank you for listening, whoever you are, my executor, or as I often say, the reason for recording these videos is that in the hope that one day somebody will be studying a PhD on the subject of poetry, because that would be really nice, and it would be a nice outcome for having spent so much time working on poetry. And historians, yeah, that would be nice, but I'm not going to push my luck that far. Anyway, take care, thanks for listening, and be sure to take a look at my other videos that have been squirreled away on my YouTube channel for such time as when I am no longer an earthly being. Bye bye.